Are live, and I am coming at you with another installment of the Patriotarchy broadcast. We're expecting my esteemed fellow host, Burger Meister, tonight. At some point in time, we've already done a cast on Dune, so I don't know how interested he might be in it, but I got a plethora of my homies up in here, as they like to say it in my neck of the woods. So, sound off, fellas.
Howdy. Dune doesn't really have like a weird greeting language thing that they do like in Star Trek, where they're like Vulcans or whatever.
The Force is with you.
The giant worm is with you always.
It's gonna eat, and then it's gonna make you high. Because the spice. Who doesn't want some spice? We like the spicy memes around here, that's for sure. But yeah, that's pretty much what we'll be talking about. So Dune will be the subject, but obviously we can get into other stuff too, because there's a lot of cultural things around Dune that is definitely relevant to us. I mean, it's kind of a timeless sci-fi classic if you think about it. And in more particular, you know, talking about the new Dennis Villenueve, I don't know how to say it.
Villeneuve.
Okay.
I think it's Villeneuve, actually.
Okay. And what he brought to the table, like his flavor of direction to bringing about the movie and putting his own spin on it. You know, as directors, they definitely have their mark, and they definitely have their way of, well, bringing the aesthetics to life and the characters to life, which I thought they nailed the casting on this one. They nailed it, the casting, and the aesthetics were pretty awesome as well. So, I mean, I don't know what any of you guys thought or think. And heck, I mean, you guys can even talk about the characters if you want, or the things that should have happened in the movie or didn't. I don't know. I don't care either way. But all you should know is that it was directed by Dennis V. And the main story goes is Paul of House Atreides has to, or, well, becomes a messianic-like figure in this universe. He's the main character that the story's centered around. And with that, he goes on adventures and becomes the Kwisatz Haderach, which is the messianic figure that the homeworld of Arrakis, which the Atreides come in power of, and were sabotaged by the main villains of the book, the Harkonnen, with help of the Sardaukar, are taken over, and they find the Fremen, which are the Arakeen homeworld tribe, and they're known, and amongst our circles we would call them noble savages, and they're a pretty cool culture too. But we can get into detail with that too. So enough of me talking. Any of y'all, what do you guys think?
Did it bother anyone else that Baron Harkonnen was not bad enough? I mean, you see people fatter than that in Walmart all the time. I was a little bit disappointed.
It's the future, so maybe things got better for a bit.
That's a fair point. It is kind of an optimistic archaeofuturism. Is the whole idea behind it. So maybe he's like a blast from the past. The obese homosexual pedophile of the 21st century coming forward 10,000 years to wreak havoc.
I thought, though, they got his voice down pretty well. I mean, he was a pretty foreboding figure, for sure.
He doesn't even look fat, actually. When I read the book.
I did love what they did with his floating. It was very interesting. It's not, at all how I imagined it while reading the book or seen it depicted in the past, but it was actually a lot more menacing and interesting. How his robe just kind of seemed to make him float. It was almost reminiscent of the villain from The Little Mermaid.
Ursula?
Yes, yeah. The fat woman.
Oh, unfortunate.
I think the movie did I was really impressed with how effectively it conveyed, because what's difficult about Dune to convey as a book is how much of the story takes place in Paul's head. It's very introspective. And it did a really good job, as good as I think it could have done, of conveying that and doing the whole like multiple timelines, seeing the past and the future, kind of play out in front of them as they could have.
Right, with the flashbacks and the way he was getting those random kind of visions of Chani, which is his main love interest, or his destiny in the book, if you will. And that makes him realize part of his purpose and why he's so connected to Arrakis, and why he's got to be a part of the liberation of the Fremen and the true emperor, because he gains powers that are far beyond that anybody's ever seen. And obviously the sisterhood, or one of the political orders fighting for power, just as that book is as intriguing as that. They don't really go into that either, which kind of surprised me. And like you said, Robert, there's a lot of internal dialogue. There's a lot of internal maneuvering, and who's going to slit whose throat next, and if I do this or if I say this, is this going to sabotage me? Or put me in favor with, the person I'm talking to. So there definitely is a whole lot of that, but they didn't really do that with this movie. It was more so just as like kind of Villenueve's, I'm just gonna call him Dennis, as far as like Dennis and his like, how can I put it, his scenery and the aesthetics, can't talk tonight, breathe, and they show, they breathe life into the movie, and they it just speaks for themselves, and it was kind of a neat way to watch a movie like that, instead of it being constantly filled with backstory and dialogue and just constant. Well, I feel like the movie industry does this a lot, but it's just constant backstory and beating you over the head with, this character's this and that, and they're so concerned about all that frivolous nonsense where they don't let, part of the medium speak for itself, and movies are a visual medium, and they definitely let that happen with this movie, I should say Dennis let this happen with this movie. All right. Guys.
Yeah, some of the aesthetic touches he had were really good too. Things that came off really well from the books, like the ornithopters. I was really happy with how those turned out, because that's such an evocative part of, how they get around Dune, and just such an interesting, different, one of the interesting ways in which Dune technology is different, and they did a really good job with the ornithopters. Of course, probably the highlight of the whole movie might have been the Sardaukar planet, and representation of the Sardaukar was just so absolutely perfect. Because the Sardaukar are interesting in the book, because they're really kind of the introduction and the playing on of this theme of, like, hard people conquering the galaxy, which is kind of one of the themes that Frank Herbert is playing with, this sort of cycle of civilizations idea he plays with from Dune. And the Sardaukar are kind of the first introduction of that. They're these hard as nails people raised on a planet where only a small percentage of them even survive to become Sardaukar. And they're just portrayed so perfectly. Like the fact that they use Tuvan throat singing, like the Mongolian style of music for like their rituals that they're doing on the planet is so unbelievably perfect, when the Mongols kind of encapsulate historically the archetype of that idea that Frank Herbert is playing with, right? These people from the fringes who live lives that are so hard that they can sweep in and destroy civilized peoples and conquer them, which is, of course, what the Fremen end up doing. Spoiler alert. But the Sardaukar are kind of the Emperor's reservoir of hard people to do his bidding. So the way they portray them was just so perfect.
I'm not going to even try to make any Space Marine references on this. But, yeah, they definitely had that harshness to them. And it was even cool in the way that main Sardaukar, I guess, commander, general, lieutenant spoke to the one of, the Emperor's lackeys, if you will. And, the way they made his voice sound. It was so cool.
Right. They had their own language. I mean, because on the one hand, that's definitely something they could have easily messed up, because in the books, the Sardaukar are not. They're talked about, right? They're kind of this presence in the background. Everybody talks about, oh man, the Sardaukar, we better watch out for them. And then they show up on Arrakis and wipe everybody out. But you don't have this like visit to their planet to check them out. You don't see the Sardaukar planet, and
Yeah, it's a prison planet, and that's about it.
Right. So it could have been very, iffy to pull off. But I mean, this is, like you said, with what Villeneuve is so good at. He's an amazing shower. So instead of doing like the book did and telling, people talk about the which is more of a book way to express things, he just showed it by taking you to the planet, and he pulled it off just beautifully. Yeah, and like what you said, like them having their own language and stuff like that just like adds to it. That's not stuff which is necessarily in the book, but it comes across so perfectly to deliver the same idea that is conveyed in the book with how people talk about them.
They have their own language, and they have their own like rights before they leave the planet as well, that they showed, which was not in the book either. All of that to kind of create this mystique about them that you just don't see with the other, or that you just didn't see in the book. They just kind of show up in the book and just straight up murder everybody. But you don't, like in the movies, they can't, it's not quite the same thing, right?
Well, yeah, and stuff like their rituals, though, also totally works, because it's very consistent, again, with these themes that Herbert is playing with. Because he has these ideas of like hard people coming from the outside and conquering civilization, and a key to that idea is religion, and that plays into the Fremen with their prophecy about the Kwisatz Haderach, and that Paul fulfills, and they launch this jihad across the galaxy. So it would make sense for the Sardaukar to have an element of that too, right? Like they're what Fremen become the better version of, or the more powerful new version of. So it makes sense that the Sardaukar would be. I mean, and that's what's interesting about Dune, right? And it's a big part of the archaeo-futurist element of it. It's not this Star Trek universe where everybody's a rational, irreligious, godless, Reddit fedora wearer. It's a extremely religious society. And you were making your reference to Space Marines earlier, JP, and obviously that's where a lot of those ideas come from, of like a archaeo-futurist, super religious, advanced society in the future.
Yeah, like there's almost a idea there that belief itself creates stronger people, and that the belief itself makes them more able to take over. Belief in something take over. Though there's not, at least from the book, there wasn't a lot of evidence that there were people who didn't believe in things, if that makes sense. But there was definitely a degree to the amount they believed in something. Like there's kind of with Maudib or Paul, the change between being the civilized outsider and then the initiation from the vision of the jihad into becoming a hardened person and having the belief of something.
Yeah, because it's key to remember in this that a big thing that influenced Frank Herbert with Dune was the rise of Islam. That's something he's definitely toying with there. The parallels are obvious, right? Paul kind of is this sort of like Muhammad-like character who leads these just backwards people from the desert who everybody looks down on this massive galactic conquest with huge religious overtones. I mean, that's exactly what he's, pulling on for his idea there is the Islamic conquest.
Yeah, and I mean, the way those empires, or the houses, like House Atreides, House Harkonnen, were set up, you almost get, obviously with House Harkonnen, you almost get the Imperial, forces of Star Wars, or the Imperial. And then with the Atreides, you get kind of a rebellion vibe to them, but the virtues shine through. And obviously, with the rebellion and then being the good Jedis, because I already made a Space Marine reference, and I'll get back to that. But you get on how the Atreides value things. Like the one scene where Duke Leto and Paul, and it's both in the book and in the movie, and they all go out with Dr. Kynes to watch a spice harvester, which is the whole point of why they're at Arrakis in the first place. And they're like, well, Duke Leto's like, forget the harvester, save the men working, so he values life. Now, on the flip side, the Harkonnen treated the Fremen so bad for so long that they think any outside influence is going to be a bad influence. And obviously, once again, the Harkonnen are the flip side of the Atreides. They're the inverted sense of, vices. They're all the vices. So the vices and the virtues really stand out pretty prominent between these two houses. And spice, could be even the equivalent of like the United States or Europe, the Western world. Their tie into oil and resources and how they control those resources through these various companies. Like, for instance, one company set up in the book is the Chom Company. And the Chom Company, they have to travel with the spice to these highly evolved humans, which is another, the Chom Company could definitely be mistaken for a religious corporation, Catholicism, but I'm not saying anything. And you could even get to the point where these humans that have been warped, that are the what do they call them? The spacing guild and
the navigators, the Chom Company. The Chom Company, to me, represents more like in medieval times, or like more later on, I guess, like in the Age of Conquest, or whatever you want to call it, taking over North America and stuff like that, represents me to more the guilds of navigators, which these are also called navigators, but they did the exact same sort of thing, except for with drugs in Dune, that the people, the drugs or spice, I should say, in Dune, that they did in the old days. You would have two captains on a ship. You'd have the captain, and then you'd have the navigator captain. And the navigator captain was in charge of all navigation. And they were almost more important than the actual captain. And they could even override the captain the other captain in many cases. And anyway, the navigator captain would have like books that would guide them through dangerous territories and stuff like that. This is also copied actually more explicitly in Warhammer. They have navigator houses, and they have navigator guild, and they go through the warp with the navigators, and it's the same idea that's going on in Dune, of these people who are highly specialized and highly knowledgeable in their field, or in this case, like, they're straight up unable to live without the spice, being necessary for travel, and in the same way that they were in those old days.
It's been a while since I read the book, but my impression was, when I read it, that it was kind of like, and this may be totally incorrect, but my impression was that it was totally like a big reveal kind of at the end of the book, that like the guild navigators were completely dependent on spice to run like the travel of the galaxy. That seems wrong now watching the movie, and it's kind of talked about like right from the beginning why it's so important. But that was just my impression from my first reading of it.
That could be true. I don't really remember. It's kind of one of those things that once it's revealed to you, it just makes sense.
Yes, yeah.
But,
Which is why I don't think it struck me when I reread it.
Yeah.
Because I already knew it, yeah.
You kind of assume it because there's a part where there's a navigator from the Chom Company who is in somebody's retinue, the Emperor's retinue or something, and he's giving, or Harkonnen, and he's giving advice on how to deal with. This might actually be in Dune Messiah. I could be mixing this up, but he's it's in Dune Messiah. Sorry, so never mind. But in Dune Messiah, there's a guy who basically is like plotting, and he can't even live outside of space. He has to be put inside a special system to keep himself from dying from gravity, with suspensors and stuff. So yeah, they're literally so used to space and spice that they can't even live in normal society anymore.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that in part 2. I hope that shows up because they
If you
did show.
Go ahead.
I was going to say they did show a guild navigator like that in David Lynch's Dune, the '84 Dune, which was really cool. So it would be awesome in the new version to see it, I'm sure.
Isn't that funny on how they did that because they pulled it out in a vat, and then somebody spoke through what looked like a 1920s microphone, and then the voice that came from it was so ridiculous.
It was one of the things that came off as less cheesy, though. I feel like it was pretty accurate to the books in that version. But all that to say, I think Villeneuve's would be even better. I mean, one thing that he pulled off super well, and that was really just compelling visual storytelling, was with the sandworms, which of course is something you don't want to be disappointed on, and it absolutely did not disappoint. You could really. And you see, I didn't even get to see it in theaters, which is I'm bummed about. I really wanted to see it in IMAX, but it didn't work out. But you even without watching it in theaters, you still got the feeling of why the Fremen worship the worms, right? Because their presence is just so overwhelming. It was conveyed extremely well.
And they gave it what's the name they give the sandworms?
The Maker.
No, the Arabic influence named.
Oh, it's the
shoot.
Shai
Halud.
Shai Halud, yeah.
Which is pretty neat
Shia LaBeouf. Giant worm.
He's gonna be in another movie, according to Dune, but it's Indiana Jones and a complete ripoff. Dune, the Indiana Jones series. Oh man! But with Transformers, you got to tie in the space. So I mean, obviously, it's gonna happen with LaBeouf. But yeah, I mean. The sandworms were, that's cool. That was really cool. And way less cheesy than what I thought it would be, because I have this hard time of thinking about the sandworms, and my mind instantly goes to Beetlejuice. Like the sandworms from Beetlejuice. I just can't get it out of my head.
Yeah, I think it's one area where CGI does really well compared to physical effects. Because compare it, say, to the original Star Wars, the asteroid worm they get stuck in. It was very good effects for the time, Obviously, all things Star Wars from the original trilogy with the practical effects, but it didn't. That's one of the things from the movies that didn't hold up as well, was actually the worm. It seems a little janky nowadays. But yeah, with like 2020, 2021 CGI, what Dune could pull off is just like stunning. Like the visual effect of it is just kind of overwhelming in a good way.
The practical effects of Alien. I mean, come on, like, that shit holds up. You know.
Oh yeah, I mean most of Star Wars does too. Really, really well. That's just like one example from the movies where it just didn't.
Yeah, the worm in
hold up as
Star
well.
Wars. I'm sure it's glaring to a Zoomer mind when you see that damn worm. You're just kind of like, whoa, this is not, you know, I don't know, whatever fucking video game people are playing now. This ain't that good, man. But have you already talked about the hand-to-hand combat in Dune?
Sort of, kind of. We touched on it with the starter car, but I mean, we can definitely.
I mean,
like,
well, it sounds like you're saying. Well, I mean, you know, I just hopped in, but I think
hello,
that
JJ.
I think that I mean, I think that's something that was done really well. I mean, when you read, I'm not all the way done reading Dune, but I am reading it currently as we speak, and I mean that's something that I think that is done really well. I mean, I can't imagine a better rendition of how people could, you know, how you would put that on a film. Like, how do you show the field, the force field? You know, how do you show how, you know, the damn blades get through the, you know, the kind of protection that these people have when they're fighting. And that's the thing that, you know, as somebody that had not really grew up reading Dune, even though I liked sci-fi, even though I've loved Star Wars and read a bunch of Star Wars comic books and stuff like that, you know, I just never had been into Dune for whatever reason. And it's definitely something that I can't, you know, I don't know how I got around that, you know, I really can't explain it. I mean, because it's like right up my alley. I mean, everything about it is just awesome. Like, I like the kind of like the spiritualism to it. I like the arcade futurism to it, you know, the romanticism of it. I like the kind of nature of, in a way, going native. But I mean, like someone's pointed out to me before, it's like, well, it's not really celebrating going native, right? It's like using the natives. But there's that appeal of, well, it's the appeal of, look at these people that aren't civilized, right? And they're still honorable, and they have these qualities that are obviously good, you know. And I like that.
Dune is like one of the last great works of traditional Western Orientalism.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean,
Or is he being sarcastic?
Well, I mean, I think he's being serious. Yeah, I think he's being serious. I mean, it is. I mean, this is. I mean, I don't know. Like, I listened to a really good interview of Frank Herbert that anybody can listen to on YouTube. It's like an hour and a half, you know. And if you just search Frank Herbert interview, it'll come up, and he's talking about, you know, the background of the story, and you know, his writing process and influences and stuff like that. It's a really good interview, and you know, he reiterates a couple things, and one of the things that he reiterates is, I don't know, like, it always seems like people on the right gravitate towards this and claim it for themselves. You know, that this is kind of a reactionary type of story, and I can understand that. But when you listen to what Frank Herbert says in his own words, what he reiterates is two things: the importance of ecology and the kind of danger of one leader being too powerful. So that's not really reactionary, you know. It's not right wing, but it's not really I don't know. So that's what stuck with me, watching it and thinking about it.
You consider this a reactionary? Well, I mean, not saying you, but do you think this would be considered a reactionary kind of story?
A lot of people did.
Highly reactionary. It's about eugenics. It's like the core of the story. They've been on a centuries-long breeding program.
They don't talk about that too much in the movie, right?
Right.
But it's the context of the entire story.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically political eugenics. Yeah.
That's what I was saying. And I mean, it's not, dude, JP, it's not even, what I'm saying is that I'm kind of throwing counter to that in a way, is that like the mainstream take, not the mainstream, but a lot of the conventional take on it is that it's a reactionary story. And I see that, and I agree with that in a lot of ways. But if you listen to the man himself, like the big thing that he's talking about is that, look, it's dangerous if one man has a ton of power, and that's not a reactionary theme. The danger of one man having too power is not reactionary. But
I don't know. Maybe
that's from his own mouth, man. I mean, are you saying you don't know about like whether or not that's?
I don't know that that's not a reactionary idea.
Well, if you think that
who you're talking to.
But if you think of Paul and the person he becomes a prisoner of his own fate. So, in a way, he does have too much power, and he sees the terrible purpose. Now, in this first part, they obviously play on fear. Fear is the mind killer. Wash away the fear, and only I will remain. They really, really hit that home with this one, which is an obviously big theme of the book. But what what JJ just touched on with the hand-to-hand combat and the knives, well, the swords and the knives, everybody's probably expecting space blasters, droids, all of that rolled into a futuristic, / space conquest kind of movie. But the interesting part about that is that obviously people who know the story know leading up to it that technology is forbidden, and they don't use, not technology, thinking machines to be more precise with it. And
I wish they would have touched on this more in the movie for people. Like it's not really.
They would have touched on stuff.
When you view, I mean, from my perspective, when I saw the movie, and I'm probably a good gauge of that because when I went into the movie, I had only read about 80 pages of Dune, and so, it's like a 600-page book, and so when I went in there, I mean, of course, I knew that I had heard people talk about Dune, so it wasn't like I was going in there that completely unaware. But like, it's not. I wish they would have told more about like why they were dealing with technology the way they were dealing with it, like because you could be kind of caught off guard if you're like, okay, they got space travel. They have all these different other types of technology. Like, why are they fighting with swords? Like, and I'm sure it's going to elucidate that a little bit further in part 2. But I mean, it's never really completely fleshed out, right? As far as other than like the reason why the reason why they curate technology the way they do, and why they reject certain things technologically is never completely fleshed out, right? It's basically hinted at essentially that it weakens the mind, right? Like they'll make these kind of comments about like, if you allow a machine to do this, then you become less, your human capabilities are not as developed, right?
Well, I don't think they even talked about the Butlerian Jihad in the movie.
No, they don't. But what I'm saying is, like, in the story as a whole, though, like in the first book alone, do they even touch on, like, is it explicitly clear why they don't do certain things, or is it just kind of vague?
I mean, it's fleshed out more in other books.
Okay.
I mean, basically, did you use the part where they talk about the Butlerian Jihad?
I'm just now getting to that. Yeah, I'm just now getting that. But like,
okay, yeah. So I mean, in the first book, you do get to the idea where there was at some point in the past where humans were dominated by machines, and I like that it's kind of ambiguous whether humans were dominated by machines in like a Terminator or Matrix sense, where they literally ruled humans, or if they were just dominated by machines, like in a 2021 sense, where people are ruled and addicted to algorithms and smartphones and stuff and panopticon stuff. But it's something like that. At one point, humans were ruled by machines, and then there was basically something not unlike what Paul Atreides did, where there was a jihad across the galaxy where they wiped out, eliminated, thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a man.
But they can nuke each other, right? They essentially have nukes.
Yeah, right? All the houses have household nukes. Great. It's literal Ancapistan private nukes.
This is why I think that Robert thinks that, like, he's kind of hesitant to say, like, hold on, wait a minute. Being anti-authoritarian or whatever is not necessarily anti-right wing or something, but that's a different philosophical debate.
But who would not want to push the red button?
because like, a very guttural, natural, manly thing to do is to reject illegitimate authority. And what can be more right wing than that, right? But
right. I mean, that's like the Lion King. It's kind of story.
It's like a lot of things. It's like a lot of things. Right. But you know what I mean? Like, there's this tinge, and there's this current that goes across, like, what we can just all agree is the right in general, which I know kind of becomes meaningless unless we specify. But yeah, everyone knows what I mean when I say right wing for the most part. There's this part of it that is authoritarian, right? Monarchical. I mean, I don't think I'm speaking like crazy here. And so, all I'm saying is that in that sense, like, if you were making like this kind of real reactionary film or story, you would have the dynasties and everything like that, and the houses and the power politics, all that is like, that's whatever. But it's like I don't think you would ultimately be playing with the danger of one man being too powerful. I just don't. But I guess I see it as, like, just because it has that thread in it doesn't, in the course of, more than just one book, just because if it has that thread in it, according to the author, doesn't make it not reactionary. I mean, I see that too. But it's just
also kind of missing, like, the Aristotelian distinction between authority and tyranny, right? So, like, the view would just be that, like, in the absence of authority, you will inevitably devolve to tyranny. If you don't have good and true authority, if you don't have some form, I guess, if you want to say it that way, authoritarianism, although I think isms are part of the problem, right? But if you don't have some sort of authority, you will get tyranny.
Yes.
And even the state, with its monopoly on violence, when it chooses not to stop crime, what it does in effect is it makes criminals the holders of the monopoly on violence, right? When it cedes that authority to people, so then you get hundreds, thousands of petty tyrants. Even like in the United States, like in blue cities where they won't prosecute criminals, and these people who get released on bond again and again and again, who then go and commit murders and stuff like that. They're like little petty tyrants taking other people's lives. There's kind of a conservation of violence in that way. If the state won't impose authority to stop criminals, then criminals will just impose violence on other people. Especially if those people are not allowed to use violence to protect themselves, which is very often the case. So the state's authority is just used to suppress the use of self-protective violence by lawful people, and then criminals are functionally tyrants.
Yeah, that was another thing. Have y'all talked about the Bene Gesserit and that too much about the dynamic?
No, not really. I mean, it's definitely, yeah.
It's one of my favorites, the female. Go ahead.
Of course it is. I mean, who doesn't like the female influence? But I think I can see where Robert was going with the petty tyranny. Obviously, the Harkonnens are, in a sense, the petty tyrants because of how much they've underestimated not only the Atreides and their enemy, but how much they've kind of forgone. Well, return to tradition, right? How much they've forgone the petty old religion of the past and have embraced, well, I guess their lifestyle, which is, well, would be modernistic and degenerate. So, they kind of did a flip on that. And the weird part is the parallel is obviously in Star Wars, you have both the Sith and the Jedi using that silly old religion of the past, whereas the Harkonnen have completely forgone it. But they don't have, the Sardaukar just have pure savagery, and they're obviously what would be considered the dangerous criminals in society, the psychopaths and the serial killers, where the Harkonnen are obviously more so your soldiers of fortune, your mercenaries for hire, but not exactly to the religious or spiritual zealotry or magnitude like the Fremen or the Sardaukar. Obviously, one for bad, one for good. And Paul obviously amplifies that with the Fremen. And he comes around and, brings about stirrings of him being that, what JJ was going to touch on, and I'm going to lead right into it, with his mother, the Lady Jessica, who is Duke Leto's concubine, which would be Paul's father, and her being able to train herself to either bore a girl or a boy. And obviously Paul, you can't tell by his name, is a boy. And with that being said, I'm going to let JJ go right into it.
Well, I got a little connection problem there. I'm headed my way to a convenience store, unfortunately, because I have to do that. But what I was going to say about the Bene Gesserit is just that I found it interesting that in a lot of different regards, okay, for one, this whole notion that women don't have power or haven't had power is just completely ridiculous, or influence, right? And I think it's great that that we have a show here. We have a movie, we have a film, we have a story where, in fact, one of the key powers in this dynamic is this kind of, I got Jedi vibes. I mean, this is like it's like Jedi for women, right? I mean, this is what these women are. I mean, they got the Jedi, they got the tricks, they got the, just the different things that they can persuade people. They're also
the voice.
Yeah, they're into the voice. they got the dark arts. They're very physical, athletic. They can fight and they can seduce your ass. I mean, it's nice. I mean, they got everything. And then at the same time, they're not just like these kind of, I don't know, like Paul's mom is like literally a concubine, but she's also the mother of the Duke's heir, and it is in a prominent position, even as not a formal wife, and this type of thing you would find this in different historical circumstances among different civilizations where a woman wasn't the wife, but was like the lover or the concubine and had a lot of power. So there's that. There's also the fact that that these women, I mean, they're real power players. Like it's the navigators that control the time travel or space travel, and their power dynamic with the emperor and the family. But then it's also the Bene Gesserit. They're like, it's like this tripart like power structure to the empire, and they're right in the mix. And I thought that was interesting, and they didn't really flesh that out. The way I understand that is from the reading, is what I got that. So you could go into this movie and not really appreciate, right, how powerful they are, and they are really powerful.
Well, I mean, Villenueve definitely didn't flesh a lot out, but Robert, go ahead.
I was going to say they were also portrayed very, very well visually, with the storm in their ship that kind of descends like the classic UFO abduction ship.
Oh yeah,
Close Encounters of the Third Kind sort of thing. It fit very well into like their mysterious nature.
Did you think like when they made the visual effects kind of come to life as far as CGI goes? Because I know you touched on this earlier. Do you think that they like there was a very realistic aspect to it? Like these things could happen.
Villeneuve is very good at making CGI that looks good. It's not like this garbage, Marvel stuff that gets pumped out constantly. It's not like that. He's kind of a master of blending the real with the computer generated to make something that looks very, very authentic. And yeah,
I mean,
it looks like it's real.
All of his films are super aesthetic. I mean, Blade Runner and Sicario.
Yeah.
I mean, these films, and when you look at Prisoners, like one of my favorite films that he did is a film that most people don't talk about that much. And I don't really know why, other than the fact that it's dark as hell. I mean, somebody like, you want to talk about a right-wing movie? You want to talk, watch Prisoners. That's a right-wing movie. It's about family. The guy's a Christian. Anyway, I don't want to get too much, divert too much. But the point is, this director is I haven't seen a movie that he's made and been like, it's not, very awesome atmosphere, cinematography, gorgeous. The way that in a set, like just like a room to like a whole overview of a planet or something, and anything in between is going to be really well done. There, I heard a lot of complaints about the film, but I mean, like a lot, and I just feel like it was one of those things that people just were almost like never going to be happy about whatever that came out, and there was a delay. It was supposed to come out before it did, and well before it did, and then COVID and all that. But I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that it is a 10 out of 10 film or even a 9 out of 10, but I thought it was good. And I thought it, the only thing that I was disappointed in about it, to be honest, really the only thing like that bothered me was the fact that it's going to be broken into two parts. Like in a way, I like that because they would be able to get more into maybe in the second part more than they would be normally. But in some ways, I didn't because it's like you want to know, you want the story.
I think it's basically like a requirement though for how big of a book Dune is. You've got to have a 5+ hour film, which you can't just have. You can't have a film that's that long.
Do you know if they were? Do you know if they were going to do it in two parts? Because I never heard anything about that before. But I hadn't been like following the production too much.
I think that was planned relatively early. I mean, that was before COVID delays and all that.
That's
stuff.
good. Not good. That makes me feel like it's more legitimate then, because I was wondering if they were like, because they had to push it back. They're like, well, now we've invested this, so it's all this money. You know how it is. Like they're not doing. I just immediately think of like The Hobbit. Like, how are you gonna make The Hobbit, this little book, into 3 fucking movies? You know what I mean? It's like, give me a break.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's kind of different. Like you said, Dune is 600 pages.
It's way different.
The Hobbit is a pretty short book.
Yeah,
actually.
I think The Hobbit is like 200 pages, maybe. I don't know. I can't think of it right off, but it's not even 300.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing they missed a little bit with the Bene Gesserit is they really missed one of the a really good line they could have easily included there in the Gom Jabbar scene where Paul has his hand in the box. What's in the box? But what they really missed there was the potential for the line that the Reverend Mother says, where it's like, this is to figure out if you're an animal or a human, because an animal will gnaw off its hand to get out of a trap, but a human will endure the pain and live through it. It's maybe a little bit of a missed opportunity, but maybe there'll be a director's cut or something with little stuff like that. Might have just been.
Hold up, she did say that.
She did?
Yeah, definitely.
I remember that from the book, but
definitely a black box scene, man.
She definitely said it. It's okay.
Maybe I was
distracted.
I missed when that happened. Yeah,
but
well, that's good.
I mean, that plays into the whole "only I will remain." Fear's the mind killer, and that has a very, dare I say it, Jedi tinge to it too.
Yeah, I thought kind of Zen Buddhism stuff very popular.
Yeah,
very much in the air in the 60s and 70s.
The new wave, new age.
Frank Herbert was there on the West Coast. George Lucas was there on the West Coast.
Lots of drugs.
California. We can talk a little bit about like the good and bad of the diversity casting, I guess. It's a little bit of a controversy. I mean, first the good. I thought they had the one black guy who was the Emperor's Herald. I thought was a great fit for that role. He was really really well suited for that role because he looked like he was Nilotic, from like Ethiopia.
Yeah, they did. Area. They kind of did have with the Emperor too, and the way his royal guard was dressed, I guess you could put it. They did have a very Middle Eastern vibe to them. Like you definitely could tell it was something like Ottoman, Mongolian. It's kind of Asiatic vibe to it for sure.
Hadi Shah Emperor is what he's called.
Hadi Shah.
Even in his name.
I'm gonna have a fresh Hadi Shah.
I guess that means something totally different.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that. It's a family friendly show.
Yes, it is.
So save your potty shots for you and your wife, and we'll keep going here.
Oh, snap. Okay. God. Off the beaten path. Oh. Okay, that's enough. That's enough.
But I thought that was a really good captain choice. If you want to do the diversity captain, because he was a great fit for that as kind of like the Emperor's Herald. But then you had Kynes, the casting for Kynes, which was pretty unfortunate. And not just that, because Kynes, the gender swap was probably the most egregious thing, because Kynes really comes across in the book as like a Lawrence of Arabia character, He's very much like that because he's an imperial agent.
Judge of the change.
Yeah, right. But he's gone native. Much like Lawrence of Arabia, he was sent as an agent of the British Empire. But, at least in his representation in the film, he's gone native. It's arguable whether the real Lawrence of Arabia was like that, but
right. But the guy who played him in the 1984 film definitely looked like real life Vincent Van Gogh, which I was kind of like, I can't get that image out of my mind for Dr. Liet Kynes, which was one of those things where you just think like a guy that looks as European as that dude did, the archetypical probably Anglo/German living amongst the Fremen, and you think that like this guy is totally a fish out, pun intended, totally the mouse out of the desert, you know what I mean? It's just you don't put that together.
And he's described in the book as sandy hair. Right. The way that it worked in the book, right, he was a Lawrence of Arabia character. So he's like this, right, like you're saying, a very Anglo-looking guy who sticks out among like the brown Fremen, basically.
Yeah.
Just like Lawrence stuck out with the Arabs. So you totally lost that whole dynamic in
vibe,
in the movie, which you could have portrayed easily just following the showing, right? If you casted it that way, it would clearly look that way to people. But they just kind of lost that whole element, that like imperial agent gone native aspect. It just didn't come across.
I know one thing I really did like Jason Momoa, because I like Jason Momoa and everything. So, this guy, I didn't like the fact that what he looked like without a shaved beard. It kind of threw me off. But other than that, but
that was great casting.
And Jason Momoa, he's just a guy that's like very charismatic, and he's that type of dude that if you're gonna have somebody, making a last stand and defending, so you could do a retreat, he's the guy that you want. And the other guy that I was impressed with as far as like a side character is the actor that Josh Brolin, his character, he was kind of like with Paul
Gurney Halleck.
Yeah, I think
Josh Brolin was Gurney Halleck, and Jason Momoa was Duncan Idaho. Which Duncan Idaho in the book is pretty much the same way. He's way more boisterous, and obviously way more charismatic than pretty much anybody else in the book. Like he's that kind of character.
And it is, and I got y'all. Have y'all really? Paul was perfect casting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else
he was a believable 15-16-year-old.
Even though he's 31 or something, of course.
What?
It's worse than me playing it's worse than me playing a 25-year-old, man. I could pull off 28 maybe, but we're stretching it after that, boys.
AJ's gone from state jet plane to movie star overnight on a podcast.
Yeah, I thought almost all the casting was really good. Yeah, most of the side characters were particularly really good.
I really liked Javier Bardem as Stilgar. Like, I really liked. I mean, Javier Bardem's just a great actor. Like, he breathes life into his characters, which whomever he plays, whether they're unknown or known. And I know we've talked about him before in another series of podcasts, but I really like Stilgar as a character because I think he's like he's the obvious voice of reason in an unreasonable situation. So that stands out. But he also kind of has like a Gandalf of the desert vibe to him too. Like he knows things and he senses things just as you can tell just as much as Paul does. But then he always has it in the back of his mind that he's not to give away too much for the second one, but he's also like, as the Fremen have their code and have their honor, he always wonders why, in the back of his mind, Paul doesn't challenge him to become the leader of the Siege. And the Siege is obviously the Arabic word for city. And being from that mindset and that tribal kind of society where your leaders have to survive, so the strongest survive. So there's a definite Darwinian overtone with the ecology. That Javier, like, he just did it justice. Like his accent, his like the way he acted. And even in that one scene where he comes in to talk to Duke Leto, like I'm like that one scene, I was like, yep, that's if I could picture anybody as like Stilgar in real life, that he knocked it out of the park. And he was, for a good portion of the movie, he was a side character too. So thought he did a really good job with that.
Who's like a crazy looking dude is that David Batista dude, that actor that all hated Nimba. He not the Harkin patriarch, but the
Paul. He played Paul. The Beast of Bond
films. He's like he's
a wrestler. He's a pro wrestler.
Yeah, he's popping off a lot now. In different things now. I'm trying to think of what I've seen him in recently. I've seen him in he's in this show, ironically enough, called C with Jason Momoa. That's it has its problems, but it's a kind of a dystopian sci-fi in a way after some catastrophic thing happened, etc. But the point is, they it's funny to see Jason Momoa and him both in this film together, even though their paths don't cross in any type of way. But I mean, yeah, when you look at the cast with you're dealing with Javier is a great actor, Josh Brolin's great actor. It's like there's so much talent. I mean, Oscar Isaac and Leto, the Duke, I think is really good. I think Lady Jessica, Paul's mom, I thought she was really well casted. I mean, I don't really have any gripes with any of the casting. I thought the doctor did a good job, right? Dr. Welling is the doctor. Is the doctor? Is he
Welling?
described?
Oh,
Yeah,
Yui.
is he described in the book as Asian? Really though,
I
I don't
don't.
know.
Yeah, I don't know. See the physical aspects of some of these people versus like Robert said with Dr. Kynes. You know,
Yeah,
you don't really get a whole lot as far as like physical aspects go. Well, Baron Harkonnen, but with a name like with the last name or a house name of Harkonnen, you obviously kind of think, well, not to get complete right wing aesthetic with it, but
you're gonna get there. You're gonna get there. No, I'm just kidding.
you're tickling me. Okay. Uh well, I mean, I mean, with the last name of Harkonnen, you kind of get like I mean, I think of Vikings too. I think of
Yeah, but
German. I think of like Germanic, Nordic.
it sounds like a badass name. It's like these people
It
are
is a
not to be.
badass name.
Yeah, it's like don't fuck with us. That's what that means.
Yeah,
I feel like you know,
Uber Finnish.
our,
It's Uber
yeah,
Finnish.
our
Good.
our Scandinavian if you have any Scandinavian listeners or everything are gonna get triggered by this, but it sounds like to me it sounds like yeah Finnish, but I mean I don't know, fuck man, it could be Danish. Who knows, man? The thing is these people play with these names.
Dansk. Yeah.
They the way that Frank Herbert, you know, that's what's just interesting. I mean, because
He's
when you
kind of
go
like
back,
Tolkien in that aspect.
yeah, I mean, but it in a way, but I mean, I think that I'm curious, like even as the background that I did on the author, you know, because I'm just a curious person, like, you know, I like to investigate these guys that create these things, and the he, I found out a lot about him as far as like his interest in ecology, but I didn't really get the. It's interesting how he played with the obvious like Arab, Middle Eastern type of names like
Mm-hmm.
the Moab, what is it, the Muabadim or something like
Muad'Dib.
Muad'Dib, that type of name. You know, the Bene Gesserit even in a way, and he spent all his time, you know, dealing with the desertification of this region in Oregon. Like he was just researching,
Huh.
like why is this place, you know, becoming more and more sand dunes in Oregon? And if people don't know, apparently, you know, there's literally like a desert in Oregon, and I never would have thought of that, you know. And I'm
Yeah,
pretty
I
good.
would have. Yeah.
I'm pretty good with geography, especially in the United States. And anyway, he, you know, before he even wrote anything about Dune or the characters, he spent numerous years concerned with this desert.
Mm.
And it's not really desert, but dunes, sand dunes. And and so once he was, and he said that like his process was, he had an elaborate file system. So you're talking about like a really diligent, orderly type dude that's super creative, which is like the best combination because you have a guy that he has this like he'll research something and he'll store it away in a very efficient way, and then he'll add to it, add to it, add to it, you know, and he would take that information that he gathered, and
Mm-hmm.
then when he was writing, you know, about the planet, you know, Dune or
Arrakis.
Brachus, you know, he would pull directly from that firsthand experience that he had as like an amateur ecologist, um, and then okay, that makes sense, like why it would transfer over to okay, what people in world history, you know, had a lot of, you know, would live in this type of environment. Okay, the Arabs,
Okay.
you know that type of thing.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking of is that it just struck me as if you look at the time period, he's writing this in the early 60s. the story. It's published in 1965, so there wasn't a whole lot of news, if you will, about the Middle East. It wasn't like popping. The Palestinians.
Well, if you think about it, though, I mean, yeah, of course you had the Palestinians and always the you-know-whos. The Ottoman Empire fell in 1880.
Well,
yeah.
in World War One, at the end of World War One, it got broken up. But
Yeah.
so you're talking like 1918, it gets broken up. I mean, of course, I'm not saying it was in the kind of. It's not like Americans didn't think anything of the Middle East. It was before the Palestinian conflict really erupted in the 70s that he was writing. And so it struck me as kind of interesting that he was getting information about these Bedouin people or these Arab people and applying it to his story. And that's it's really cool about a story like Dune, is that even though it's science fiction, of course it has elements that are applicable in in the world. It seems I don't know, fairly realistic in some ways. How these tribal people would be so concerned with water, right? They make that very explicit in the movie, right? With the suits that they wear. I don't know if you talked about, like, I thought that was
the still suits.
Yeah, I thought that was a cool aspect of the movie.
Well, water is literally life, and it's recycled life, and obviously with the ecological implications, I mean, in a way, their way of living is, not taken for granted. Like, they have to basically be as resourceful as possible and as sustainable as possible to survive. Well, I mean, it's just a giant Saudi or Sahara desert planet. Filled with worms.
Yeah. I mean, it's also like, it's kind of, I liked how, like, Paul, almost gets, killed by one, basically. But when there's the scene where, they're deciding, like, okay, we're the kind of tribal chieftain Javier's character, which was in the movie, his name is what again? I can't remember offhand.
Stilgar.
Yeah, Stilgar. Like, he's very much like, okay, we're gonna keep, basically I vouch for him. But then that other guy is like, no, we're gonna have to fight it out, and they, it's like that kind of dilemma about, well, we can keep. There's this interchange of, we can keep Paul because he's a young man and he could be useful to the tribe as a warrior, and whereas the woman, is I guess a middle-aged woman, and she's not very useful, right? And this made me think honestly of tribal people, like, that I understand a little bit more about, like the Iroquois and different Native American tribes that I've studied and researched a little bit about, and how they view outsiders, people that are not part of the tribe. And it's not, and it's interesting because that, to me, that played very authentic, their interaction and the rationale for it, because, believe it or not, you could be adopted into a tribe even if you're not of those people, so the way that the tribal dynamics worked, at least from the Iroquois and other tribes in at least the eastern woodlands, they would, and other tribes beyond that, but I know a little bit more about the eastern woodland tribes in the United States. They would often adopt people into their tribe. Like, it was a very normal thing. it wasn't happening all the time, but it wasn't rare. And it kind of speaks to the kind of realism that someone like that would be like, right? Like, okay, this young man could be a good fighter, he'd be useful, we'll take him. And I thought that was I don't know, a good touch to have. And I think that, and it's not like over romanticized, in my opinion. It's again, it speaks to Frank Herbert's ability as a storyteller to incorporate things that are, of this world, that are real, that could play out in a different world that, seemingly has, elements of things that we can relate to, that we can point to and say, yeah, this stuff really did happen, or this could have happened, and that type of thing.
Okay. Yeah, like some writers, I know what you mean. Like some writers and authors have a tendency to overemphasize or over romanticize.
Yeah.
Well,
just the whole notion, like the noble, anything, but like, particularly like the noble savage, or just like, oh, of course, like, they would, it doesn't make it seem like, it doesn't demonize the Atreides family or the dynamics there. You have the Harkonnen and the Atreides, and you have these power politics going on, but it's not like, I didn't get the feeling like, oh, the natives of Arrakis are the good guys, and the colonizers are the bad guys. That will be like a criticism that a lot of people on the political right would be wary of. Like, oh, of course, the people that are colonizing are awful, and the people that are there are so good. It's not really doing that, even in the film. And I know people have a lot of people have problems with the film, and for all different types of reasons. But I thought that, regardless of how true it is to the book, because we can't really speak definitively on that because I haven't finished the book, but I didn't get the feeling that they were doing that in the film. I thought that it was showing like the good aspects of the Atreides family, and the good aspects of the native inhabitants of Arrakis, and the kind of problems that were occurring, and like, and even the realistic like approach that the Atreides family could have is that we can use, we can. The movie didn't explain well enough, like, why though, like the Atreides family, you could be, if you didn't have any understanding of the book at all, and you're just watching the film coming in cold to it, you might not really understand. Like, it seems like the Atreides are just set up to get killed. They almost seem like they're like Leda is, like the Duke is just kind of
set up for sabotage.
Yeah, well, he is, but it's like he looks almost like incompetent in the film a little bit, where in the book he's not. He knows exactly. Yeah. He knows exactly what he's getting into, and there's a specific reason why he's getting into it. And if you understand that, then it makes sense. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously, Duke Leto's the tragic figure of the book. I mean, he's definitely the quintessential. And it's funny that you mention that they're I mean, they are the virtuous house. I mean, no surprise there. They have, a Greek last name there, but not plugging that in at all.
Of course
not. But the interesting part is that Duke Leto, you're right. Duke Leto is portrayed as like he reminds me of a Knight of the Round Table in the book. Like he reminds me of like a Sir Lancelot. Like he's virtuous, he's brave, he's strong, he's charismatic, he's kind of, and kind of not an overbearing father figure, but the kind of dad that you wish you would have, and you don't want to see him die, which is why, Paul was probably upset that his father obviously was good acting too. That was the other part. When like,
go ahead.
When they cry and stuff in movies, I have a tendency just to start breaking out in laughter, because I think, it can be really cheesy and really bad, but this was believable. You could feel it.
That interchange between him and his son Paul, when he says, like, look, if you're gonna come follow me, you're gonna listen to what I'm doing, observe, and if at the end of the day you don't feel like you can be a leader, then you're still gonna be my son. Boom. That's it. That's perfect. I mean, that's what a father should be. It's like you have an obligation to listen to me and hear me out and see how things work, and try to follow in my footsteps. But ultimately, you're your own man, right? And you'll still be my son. I mean, there's nothing overly sentimental about that. I mean, I think that's good. That's good fatherhood. I mean, it's like, I don't think it's too liberal, to use a kind of word like that. I mean, I think it.
Yeah, I know what you mean, though. I think because, like, we've touched on this before, obviously with Luke Skywalker, kind of the whole killing of your father, whether his father was essentially, well, I guess in a sense, in Darth Vader, he was already dead, but like Duke Leto had to like ultimately, like literally die to get out of his father's shadow. But at the same time, you have a virtuous leader and a virtuous example in Duke Leto, and that embodied what House Atreides stood for.
Well, what I think what Carl Jung
stands for,
what the psychologist Carl Jung would say is that, unlike Sigmund Freud, every man doesn't have to or want to kill his father, but but in Carl Jung's way, it's like you have to your father has to symbolically die for you to be the man that you're going to be. Like, now that doesn't mean that you have to kill him. It doesn't mean that he has to literally die in some type of tragic way at all. Neither of that is the case. It's that you have to move beyond him, obviously, to become who you're going to become. I mean, or you're just going to be in the shadow of your father. And I mean, and sometimes that happens, like in a tragic death, or sometimes it just happens as he passes the baton to you or whatever, or you go your kind of proverbial separate ways, whatever the case may be. In a way, however it ends up being, he does die, in order for you to be whoever it is that you're going to be. I mean, you can't always, you can't forever be, the underling, essentially. I don't know. It's, and that's what I mean. Like, it's hard for me to say. Like, I mean, I wish that I thought it was also nice, like how it also showed like Paul's very instinctive, natural protectiveness of his mother during, the whole time that they're running away and, out in the desert and trying to survive. And he gets very worried about her, and she has to kind of calm him down in a way, and, make sure he doesn't, jump the gun, so to speak, in different instances when, sometimes the best, sometimes the best thing for you to do isn't to just your guttural reaction to defend yourself and to fight or whatever. Sometimes you got to be a little more subtle than that to survive. And I don't know, it was just nice to see that play out, and it wasn't I don't know, it wasn't overly dramatic or melodramatic. It wasn't I think it flowed nicely when they were, from the whole sequence of them being on that ship to it, crashing, to them wandering around the dunes, to being picked up, and being accepted into the tribe after the combat scene. And it's also cool that you get to see Paul, like, all of his training, that because you get that impression from the film that he wasn't like some, teenager that had no experience practicing and training for fighting. He did, they made that, they took screen time to show you that. And, he was getting personal instruction and, sparring essentially.
Yeah, I thought that was like really cool that they. Well, and if you think about it too, like Paul in a sense was a trained noble savage. I mean, he was well. You could also say like in a sense a warrior monk too.
Yeah, he's a warrior.
Yeah,
and that was so cool. It's like he has, and they touched on it a little bit. Like he had some, like his mother Jessica had kind of been grooming him to be the Patriotarchy, right?
Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah, I can't ever say this.
Yeah, I know they're like, I feel like they're kind of like like hybrid terms in a way too.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's definitely playing with all different types of linguistic things there. But I don't know, it was like his mom basically was grooming him, and she wasn't supposed to, she wasn't supposed to have a boy, right? She was supposed to have a girl, and and I kind of thought that she was going to be in more trouble than she got in, basically with
don't they kill her? I mean, when they kill her for that?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I got the impression that was what was going to happen eventually. But then the story unfolds a different way. But.
Well, if he didn't turn out to be the one, they were like expecting the one to come within like the next 100 years if he wasn't the one.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing that's kind of interesting. It's like at the Bene Gesserit, they put that narrative on the planet Arrakis that the kind of savior figure was going to come there, right? Like they had planted that myth, arbitrarily in a lot of ways to the people.
Well, I mean, we got kind of ecological with it. Like why not go a little bit theological with it? Like, would you compare Paul to Christ, or would you say he's more of like a hybrid, like Muhammad prophet / Buddha kind of character with, obviously tinges of Hinduism kind of thrown in for good measure?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think Robert had mentioned that there's in the time period that the book was written, there was a lot of Eastern mysticism, for lack of a better word, going on, floating in the culture. You have characters like Alan Watts and these type of people that are spreading Eastern mysticism, whether it be Buddhism and Hinduism and meditation. Those things were becoming popularized, and so I mean, and then you also have like, I mean, you're more acquainted with it than me because you read the book all the way, and the whole like the Orange Bible or whatever it's called. What is it like that?
Oh yeah, because they make references to like the old Earth and old society.
Yeah,
And they kind of, well, it's obviously not as put on as hard and fast as like I guess something where a Warhammer would be. They literally Warhammer is basically just Dune on steroids or Star Wars on steroids. And it's all grim and dark and foreboding. Whereas obviously with Star Wars and Dune, you have that hope. You have that messianic figure, in a sense.
yeah. I
But
mean, the thing is, there's definitely element. I mean, I do think, if Paul Atreides is not a Christ figure, he's definitely a Messiah. I mean,
mhm,
is he supposed to be, you know, exactly Christ figured? I don't think so necessarily, but I mean, there's different, that, there's different faiths that had a Messiah figure, like, even pre Judaism, like Zoroastrianism, like Zoroaster was a type of a messenger from God, a prophet, maybe not a savior through and through, but I think Paul meets that prerequisite. He's someone that is destined. He doesn't know if he's the one. His mom kind of thinks he is. His mom definitely thinks he is the one. That this can be analogized as, uh, I'm not trying to be sacrilegious or anything, but like like Mary, Mother Mary, and because there's not the virgin birth though, so that's where that's a divergence. But just like Mary, Jessica knows in her heart that Paul's the one, right? Um, so and then that's where it gets kind of blended together, like you said, with Buddhism. It's definitely there. I mean, with the powers of the mind, that's the big thing. It's like trying to reach the full capability of what you can do is part of that rejection of technology or thinking machines in particular, is that they wanted to hone the mind to its sharpest and fullest extent.
yeah, like the capability and to have the, well, I mean,
Because human, because that is definitely a theme in Dune, is that to be a human, like, what is it to be a real human? Like, to be a real human being is to be able to control your passion, your emotion, and to calm your nerves, and to be disciplined. And that's not just in the Eastern traditions of meditation. It's also it's also a very Christian
mhm.
ideal. Like, the church fathers talk about that, and other Christian theologians talk about being able to rein in your passions, and to be able to use your logos, and use your logic, use your mind, um, to order your life or what have you. So I mean, but I do think that Frank Herbert was using, for sure, using his, you know, the kind of zeitgeist or the culture of the time to blend this stuff together,
Mhm.
in a way. And I mean, it's like it's like they know that in the old times, in old Earth, that there was these spiritual traditions that they were trying to maintain to some degree, way, way into the future. I mean, I can't remember
Yeah.
how many years into the future is it supposed to be? I mean, it's
Oh,
thousands of. I
yeah.
can't.
It's like it's got to be at least. I mean, they make it seem like it's
10,000. I mean,
yeah,
it's like,
it's like right 5-10,000. It's wishy washy on that, but
yeah, it's just it's far flung future. And I mean to me that is there's so many different interesting aspects to it, because you have the ability to what do they call it, fold space to
they can fold space and time.
yeah. And I mean, so to be able to travel, intergalactic travel, and that was something that I researched a little bit about, like who was the first person to even, you know, write about this, in some sort of way, like, what author, what science fiction author, whatever. And you can go way back and see some types of discussion of this in some types of tangential ways, but for the most part, it essentially, it goes to things that were written in like the 20s and 30s, like almost like pulp fiction novels, would be. I, I'm losing, like it's on top of my tip of my tongue, but I can't think of it. It's um, like Flash Gordon. It's a
Oh
famous
yeah.
one. But even before that, there's shoot, and I can't think of it right now, but it's like there were people writing about space travel in the 20s and
Mhm.
30s. And of course you have like H.G. Wells and Jules Verne in the late 1800s, early 1900s, but really by like the 1920s, 1930s, people are writing about space travel. And so, I think Frank Herbert, definitely was influenced by that, just like George Lucas was. And that was what's, struck me, is if you don't, like, it was amazing to me. Like, I didn't have any concept of Dune as a kid. I didn't, like I said, I didn't read it, but of course had, you know, read Star Wars novels and comic books and watched the original trilogy and all that. And now it's like, it's so obvious how you can tell that Dune definitely influenced Star Wars, you know.
Mhm.
I don't know. There's, it's crazy, man. I mean, and that apparently, Frank Herbert really got a boost in his career from that early 80s movie that David Lynch made, the Dune, which
Yeah.
I've never seen that one. But that early 80s bumped his novels into a whole other, a whole other level of popularity and success, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, like almost 20 years after you write something, it becomes like bigger, and then now we're sitting here in 2021 talking about it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely put it into an upper echelon of just. Well, it's not even. See, and that's the thing. Like, it's not as obviously pop culture esque as what you would consider Star Trek or Star Wars to be on,
Yeah,
like the sci-fi level.
no, yeah, it's not there, but it's like right. I think it's like a notch below that, but it's still, yeah. This movie, I mean, who knows how far it'll go with this? I mean, I think they're fairly happy with how well it's done, but I mean, I don't know if it's, haven't been tracking it. I don't know if it's doing like
Yeah,
ridiculously well. It's
but
yeah,
I definitely feel like the fan base is way more cult classic oriented versus the Star Trek and the Star Wars. Well, I'm gonna say it, nerds.
yeah.
You know.
Well, it's like, well, yeah, it's like it's way more. It's like you can read a lot of Star Wars. You can read a lot of Star Wars stories, and they're not like. I mean, there's not nothing there. There's world building, and there's
Mhm.
there's there's different there's whole different you're dealing with politics, you're dealing with the empire, you're dealing with the old republic, whatever. But it's all different types of lore that's just stacked upon stacked of information in Star Wars and the whole Star Wars like universe, if you will. But with Dune, I bet if you like ask people before this movie, plenty of people really wouldn't know about it. It seems like way more do because of the type of people that are into stuff that we're into will know about it. But it is pretty niche, I think.
Yeah, and obviously with a lot of the, I mean, we already brought politics into it, so whatever. But like there's a lot of like that, like you said, the left and the right wing kind of, having their way with this planet of natives. And if you think about it, I mean, as far as the 60s go, all the way up until now, where's the planet of natives that we have kind of had our way with? And the right and left continue to fight, but yet nothing seems to change in a particular region of the world that still is, in what could be considered, well, post biblical era.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely got those tinges to it, but the Fremen are obviously, well, the quintessential space Islam society out of the entire book, out of the entire story. I mean, they are a blending of Arabian, Ottoman, what's the other? What's some
North African Berbers or
oh yeah, or Tartars. Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like I mean, it's like an amalgamation of tribal people, and of course going back to that environment thing, and just like how much does your environment mold a people, and how much does the people mold the environment, or adapt the environment. Of course, geography is going to play a big part of your culture.
Right.
Yeah, I think that the cool thing is that like people that go into it and they don't know anything about the movie, if they just or the story overall, there's elements to it that that don't fit the kind of conventional view of how things should be, politically correct and like as in like democracy is good and tradition is bad, and or antiquated old things are passe. When you watch Dune, you there's no way, like even in today's world, that even making this story into a movie that can sell tickets or whatever and appeal to like a wide range of audience, they're still going to come away with it with some traditionalism, for lack of a better word, I mean, because it plays with these great noble houses and hierarchy and honor and these themes that are, very much perennial, and just a lot of eternal truths or things that they can't really just get grafted onto today's world and be like, this is modern politics, or modern, like the paused nature of what people complain about in our culture. Like it just doesn't fit. Even this version of Dune, they don't do that. They're not astroturfing the story, in my view. There are problems with it, but there's always going to be problems with trying to make a book into a movie. I mean, that. I mean, everyone knows that. Like, yeah, it's very difficult to satisfy everybody
Mm-hmm.
when you make a book into a movie, because you're gonna read the book. Like we could, like, when I'm done with the book, me and you could talk about the book itself, and we're not gonna see it exactly the same, even though we have a lot of the same values, and we more or less grew up in the same country, right, in the same culture.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna interpret that story, a little differently. And then when you see it on film, there are going to be things in the film that you're like, wait a minute, like, I didn't see the story that way. And there are going to be things that I go, hold on, I didn't really, I didn't really like when they did this or that with it, with how they played out this, or why did they skip over this part? Why did they take out this part? Why did they edit this out or whatever? It's just really hard to nail down any novel. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I agree, because it's obviously from print to screen. It's the old adage too. Well, the book is nothing like the movie. I mean, if I could
yeah, I
dime
mean,
a dozen.
People often say that, and oftentimes, unfortunately, they're right. But the trick is, like, getting, if you're gonna do if you're gonna make a movie, if you're gonna make a book into a movie, it's like you have to get the essence of it right. And we don't know that yet, because, like, at the end of part 2, I guess we'll know, really. Did they get
Which
it
is
right?
next October.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, overall, I don't know, man. I think as we all came away with different takeaways from this, I mean, I'm not really. I thought there was going to be a little bit more, as Robert kind of touched on it with the diversity casting. I thought there was going to be a little bit more to that. I thought it was going to be tinged with, some SJW isms, if you will, but nothing, none of that, which was really refreshing. And like you said, they can't really, what am I looking for? Deviate away from the orders.
Well, what was the girl, Chani?
Chani, yep.
Chani, like that's like one of the complaints that I heard. Like, they spend too much time with him, kind of lovingly glancing, or like having these, like, premonitions that, because he would have this kind of, what do they call it in the book, like, prescience
or prescience, yes,
prescience, which is like clairvoyance, having visions of the future, and she's in them. And I don't know if, from your remembering of the book, does he have these things with her? Because I've heard that her role in the movie was too much. Like, she had too much screen time. I don't know if that is a really valid complaint or not, but I don't know. Artistic rendition. Villenueve, the director, having that in that is kind of foreshadowing, I would imagine.
Well, that's just what the story relied on, though. I mean, just like any good story, it's gonna feign and foreshadow to what is set up next. And obviously, Paul, with those powers that aren't well, I guess traditional hero type powers, because he has to come into his own.
I think that I think that people were complaining about they were complaining about like she just had like his kind of gazing at her like lovingly or like insinuating this kind of trance like obsession with her or something like she just had too much screen time. I don't know. It was something that I picked up on from somebody else. But again, like I can't really speak to it too much other than because I haven't finished the book, if that's warranted or not. You know, it seems like it seems like it's a nothing burger. Like I don't really think it should bother.
Yeah. I thought that was a meh comment.
Yeah. So I mean, well, like, where do you rank it as far as like if you want to give it a number of like 1 out of 10 or thought about that?
Shoot, just knowing and what I saw with Blade Runner and expecting it to kind of just be a flop, which is also too in the beginning scene of Blade Runner 2049. I should really specify on that. But in the beginning of that movie, who was the actor that the main character Ryan Gosling, who's in memes. Who's who is the replicant he goes to visit and ultimately take out. The guy's a pro wrestler, I'll give you a hint.
Batista.
Dave Batista. Yeah. So I thought, I was like, huh. That's interesting.
I mean, I give it I give part one a solid, B. If I'm giving it a letter grade, if I'm giving it a number grade, I give it like maybe a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm right in the neighborhood of 7 or 8.
And I think that as a whole, like it would be properly judged as a whole, so that score could definitely change, and I would properly judge it once part 2 comes out as a whole, and that number could be significantly higher. Just depends.
Mm-hmm. Well, right at the climax of this too, right at the climax of the movie is where the story is where it stopped, which I kind of thought
like the problem with Lord of the Rings, and if there is a problem with the movies, is that it's like the second one. A lot of people love the second one, but it felt like it's like building, and there's just this awesome battle in it. Not to like bring those films into it too much, but just to say that like it's hard. Again, it's like I liked each installment, but it's hard to judge it on its own. There's so many things like that go into it. Like it's like, did you read? It's like if someone's read Dune, all right, did they read the first book only? Did they read the first 3? Did they read all 6? I mean, it's and then on top of that, like if they hadn't, how would your perception be? And it's too hard to speculate, because you're already going into the film with whatever you're going into. I mean, plenty of people had seen the old film. I'd never seen the David Lynch one, so you're comparing that sometimes. Yeah.
Well, the David Lynch one you should definitely check out. The sci-fi one, or the one they did on the Sci-Fi Channel, because they did 2 on the Sci-Fi Channel, and I have yet to check out the other one. But they did Dune, and then they did Children of Dune.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah.
So and they were both they weren't even movies. They were miniseries.
Yeah.
So I mean, the sci-fi movie versus the David Lynch movie. David Lynch movie, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard good things about it.
I mean, it's definitely got it's definitely got B movie like qualities to it, but it's also got cult classic qualities to it too. You know, like it's hard to put that into words.
Made in the 80s too. I mean,
well, yeah, I mean it's got that. Yeah, I mean it did have that going against it. So like, yeah, you know, it's why you want to knock the cheesiness, but you know you can't just completely bash it because that's not fair to the story.
Well, you have what the constraints that he was dealing with when he was making that movie, like with production and what they could do with his budget or whatever it was, and special effects and all that.
Although, you know, like when it comes to the special effects, they weren't the worst. They weren't the worst I've ever seen. So that's a positive.
Yeah.
But were they the best? I mean, but also too what I do like about this new version as well is the pacing. I thought it was paced well. I thought the dramatics were definitely there, and obviously it being the visual medium that it is, you know, I mean, it set the tone, man. The atmospheric qualities to it were just there.
Yeah, man.
And movies just don't do that anymore. You know, like they just don't do that.
Yeah, I mean that's why I think that if it's like do yourself a favor and see it in the theater. I think it's one of those movies that is best seen in an actual big theater, big screen, IMAX, potentially at least. It's a little bit. I think it's just a different experience than streaming it or watching it on your laptop or something. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, to get into the atmospheric thing. I mean, when you're watching a sci-fi movie, I think it's one of those things that it's a different experience when you see it in theater. Some movies, I don't think you have to, or you don't, you don't lose anything from watching it at home or streaming it or whatever. But with something like Blade Runner 2049 or Dune or Star Wars, it's just not the same. You don't see it in the theater.
Right. And I mean, you know, obviously if this was directed by it's funny that we mentioned the Star Wars and the Star Trek. Obviously with somebody like a J.J. Abrams or George Lucas, you would get different takeaways from it too, you know? And having or even Spielberg, like you would get their stamp on it. Like you would know that they have that that quality or that aesthetic to them.
Yeah, I would, if I was thinking about a different director doing Dune, I would think my pick would be James Cameron. I mean,
okay,
Aliens and Terminator. He could probably, I liked Avatar. He could handle Dune. I think it would be interesting. I don't know if it would be better or not, but it would be somebody that I would throw in the mix.
Well, better is very subjective when it comes to this kind of thing.
It's just that Cameron's shown that he can handle a big production and a huge story, and make it into something visually pleasing to watch.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, yeah, I mean, and I, I'm glad that. I mean, I heard that if Dune doesn't make $400 million at least, it was uncertain whether or not they would even do part two, which is kind of brutal.
Well, I mean, with the fanfare that follows it, people are just, and I mean, they also got to account. People are just going to go in for pure curiosity too, just to see like what all the hype's about.
Yeah, I mean, there was a weird group of people that when I went, I said I hadn't been in the theater in forever when I went into it a few weeks ago, and shoot, man, like it it was playing on multiple screens and everything, and we went on a Friday, and it was just surreal being in a theater because the last time I had been in a theater was in 2019,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like I mean, when we saw Dune, it was shoot, it was in one of the main rooms or whatever, like bigger ones. They have two different sizes, basically the theater that I usually go to and the stadium seating and whatnot. But anyway, it definitely wasn't filled, but uh, it it was like a just a combination of people. It wasn't like really there wasn't really like a lot of young people in it. There wasn't really a lot of it was just kind of an assortment of different people, and it wasn't full, but it wasn't empty either. And it, I don't know, it kind of made me think about like why they didn't make it. I don't know if you even thought about this. Like they didn't. I was kind of surprised. Like why did they not make it rated R? It's like I don't know. It's like are they really trying to get the demographic to come in there that's kids or something? Because it's not really a kid movie, but it's not. I don't know if that would have mattered too much, but they had a lot of combat in the movie, and um, I don't know. It was kind of. I don't think it really. I don't know if it would have added more to it in any real meaningful sense, and more overtly violent, I guess, in certain instances.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's something to think about.
Well, they definitely left off a lot of like there was obviously graphic instances in the book of
Yeah,
Baron Harkonnen doing things of ill repute.
yeah,
And they didn't really nope, didn't really want to go into that. So I mean, and I there was a lot of
yeah. Did that take away from
fluff.
it? What I'm saying, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it took away from it. Is what I'm saying. I don't know.
It didn't. I don't think it did. I mean,
Hmm.
I kind of respected the letting the scenery or well, setting the stage, setting the scenes kind of just speak for themselves and just getting right to it, like to the point of whatever the conversation might be, and then boom, on to the next scene. Boom, on to the next scene. Well, this happened, this happened, this happens. And there was a reason why it happened too. Like you didn't like even with the Fremen stirring, and pointing at Paul and Jessica, and them uttering whatever word it was. You were like obviously there was a mystique there and you wanted to be like, oh, so this is going to turn into something, even if you were to go in and know nothing about the movie or the story.
Yeah, it's really one of those things that people shouldn't listen. People shouldn't listen to commentary about it until they've seen it. But that's true for pretty much anything.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I mean, it's always the case, though. I mean, that's always going to be the big takeaway from any of that.
I mean, sometimes I'll sit there and I'll listen to damn commentary on stuff before I even watch it, and I wish I don't, but sometimes I do.
Yeah.
I'm just like curious. And I'm like, all right, well, now I'm gonna go watch it. But that's just kind of boredom or wanting to entertain myself. And somebody's like, all right, listen to these guys talk about this thing, whatever.
I hear you. That's definitely a way to go about seeing what it, what it has to offer. And with that,
Yeah,
I mean, I think we're good. That was a solid cast.
yeah, man, it was fun.
For sure. Got to have you on again, even though Burger. Well,
Was he on?
he could. No. So, all right. This has been another episode of the Patriotarchy.
Night.
See ya.
The planet is Arrakis, also known as Dune.